Okay, so I took the big die out and I'm going to put a 1-inch die in. Now before I do that, I just want to show you, you have two of these long pins and one short pin. They're all the same diameter. And then you have the big pin that goes through the center. That's your center pivot pin there, and that's going to be the largest pin. Alright, when you get the die, there's a marking on the top of the die, except that's not actually the top of the die, that's the bottom of the die. It'll tell you the size, in this case it's 1 inch, and the center line radius on this particular one is 3 inches. Alright, so you want to have it, this pin, you want to go, this hole rather, you want to go to the left. This is the center pin, this is the locating pin that the big pin will go through, and this is going to prevent the die. This hole here is another pin here, will drop through it, and it'll prevent this die from rotating. So again, when you take this center pin out, be careful that nothing drops. It's going to want to wiggle around a little bit. So the quicker you get it done, the better. Make sure when you drop the pin in that the pin is bottomed. Alright? Probably won't bottom right on this roll pin, but you'll know if it's not right, it's going to be sitting up high. So you want it down like that. Alright? At that point now, you notice you need the long pin for anything that goes into the top bar. This stationary bar obviously is higher, so it takes the longer pin. In this case, the 1-inch die, the pin that prevents it from rotating goes into the number 1 hole. That's pretty obvious when you put your die in, whatever die it'll be. Smaller dies are going to be 1 or 2, and the larger dies will be 3, 4, and on. Okay, so now the die is captured, it can't go anywhere. The next thing you want to do is the U-block. This thing I put in and then put the tubing in before I put in the follow block or the pressure block. Alright, now this, it doesn't really matter which way it goes, top, bottom. It will be marked with the size 1.0, that's a 1-inch diameter, so I just leave that pointing up. And that too will take the longer pin. Okay, now you're not going to know where to put that in until you put in a piece of tubing. So at that point we can get a little piece of 1-inch tubing and we can send it through. Now some people do put the follow block in because it tends to capture it. In that case, remember, it's got to go, it'll say top, the writing has to go up on the top, and it'll tell you what hole it's got to go in. In this case it's hole 4. Now that's hole 4 on the lower arm, on the moving arm. Okay, and that will take the short pin. So we'll find hole 4, we'll bring this over till it drops, and again make sure it's bottomed. And now you can see you can move the tubing and lock it up against that follow bar. What you want to do then is you want to take the U-bolt, or the U-block rather, and put it in up against the tubing and find the hole that it fits in most conveniently. In that case, I think it's going to be C. So I'll just move that out. I got my unit on wheels, so sometimes it tends to roll a little bit. And just going to move that a little more. And there you go. Now I'm going to show you from the other side exactly what's what. But once you've got that, the tubing's going to wiggle. You're going to push this bar till it doesn't wiggle anymore. Alright? Now your tubing is set in the die. It's ready to be bent. One other thing I'm going to show you down here from this perspective so you can see exactly how it goes up against the tubing, and also want to mention where you're going to mark your tubing. Okay, I got a little light shed on the subject, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this apart now so that you can see where we're at and how we did this. Now I put the follow block in and slid the tubing through. Let me just slide the tubing out again so that you can see. Okay, so here's our follow block, and you can see the tubing in there. Alright? Some people feed it in from the front, some people feed it in from the back. Whatever's comfortable for you, it really doesn't matter. But this follow block will help to kind of support the tubing. Alright, I'm going to put this back and then I'm going to show you how we install the little U-block. And you'll notice it drops, so you're going to have to raise that up a little when you slide your tubing in. Okay, if you've done your calculations or if you've used a really good bending program like the Bend Tech Pro, which I recommend, you're going to need to put a mark where you're going to start your bend. That's something I'm not going to get into, but we're going to put a mark on our tubing. Use a paint stick, a magic marker, a piece of chalk, a crayon, whatever. Okay, that's going to be your mark based on what type of bend you're going to do. You want to line that mark up with a stationary portion. In this case, I line it up with the edge of the die, right in there, and I believe you can see that. This way, if for any reason I have to remove the tube, I can always go back to my line. Now, pushing a little bit in on the tubing, it's going to kind of seat it, and remember the tubing will not sit completely into that die. We're going to take this block, I'm going to move here so that you can see, and I said we were going to use hole B for this because I think that's where it worked the best. You see, it fits up against the tubing, and we'll drop, that's actually hole C. We'll drop it in, our pin, and again, make sure that we get it to seat. And sometimes on these smaller ones, it's a little difficult. You have to wiggle it a little bit. But once you get it in, you're good. Now you can still move this tubing around. I can move it in, I can move it out. Now I'm going to set it to where I want it to be. And I hope you can still see that mark in there. Push on the movable arm to take all the slack out of the tube, and you're ready to bend. One other thing I want you to look at. Okay, you see I can still wiggle this tube. I'm just going to take up a little bit. Make sure all the slack is out of it. A little more, there I go. Now once I've done that, this tube is stationary, it can't move. It's locked up into the die. I'm going to look down here and I'm going to see where I am. And right here I'm at 11, 12, 13, 14 degrees. So if I want to bend 90 degrees on this tube, I have to add 14 degrees to the 90. I got to bend to 104 degrees to get a 90-degree bend, plus whatever my spring back is. Now that's something that you're going to have to determine on your own, but if you have 4 degrees of spring back, you got 14 degrees initial, 4 degrees of spring back, that's 18 degrees. 4 and 14 is 18. Add that to the 90. Now you have 108 degrees. That's it. That's how it goes. One thing, the follow block or the pressure block is going to be, you're going to read where it says put it in whatever hole, 4, 5, 6, whatever it is. Don't make the mistake of thinking that the U-block goes in the same hole. It does not. It goes in the hole that keeps it closest to the die. So that's where some guys get a little jammed up. They put the follow die into the proper hole and then they try to put the U-block into the same number hole and they get jammed up because then the tubing won't lock up into the die. And that'll screw you up every time. So I hope that helps. I hope that takes some of the mystery out of it. And if you have any questions, just give me a shout.